The story begins in the final, desperate stretch of the air war over Europe, when the skies were no longer a distant battlefield but a daily, unavoidable reality for every German pilot who climbed into a cockpit. By 1944, the Luftwaffe was exhausted, its aces steadily disappearing, and the vast industrial machine that once powered its dominance was falling behind. Yet rumors spread through German airfields like wildfire, rumors of a new American escort fighter that could stay with the bombers all the way to Berlin, and then outrun almost anything that tried to intercept it. Some pilots dismissed the talk as exaggeration, the kind of inflated legend that often followed a new enemy machine. Others weren't so sure, because every week, more of their friends weren't coming back. When the first wreckage was brought in, many expected to finally confirm what they believed, that the aircraft everyone feared was just another Allied fighter with a shiny paint job. But then came the day that changed everything. A P-51 Mustang, damaged but intact enough to fly, fell into German hands. Not fragments, not a burned-out shell, a real, captured Mustang, and for the first time, Luftwaffe engineers and pilots could put the rumors to the test. What they discovered was enough to unsettle even the most seasoned veterans. Long before that moment, the Americans had known the war couldn't be won unless their bombers could reach deep into Germany without being massacred by interceptors. The B-17 seconds and B-24 seconds flew bravely, but bravery wasn't armor. They needed a guardian, something that could fly farther than any fighter had ever gone, defend heavy bombers at 25,000 feet, and still be fast enough to take the fight to the enemy. That challenge shaped the Mustang's destiny. But the P-51 didn't start as a miracle machine. In fact, it was born in a surprising way, as a British request. Early in the war, the Royal Air Force needed fighters fast, and American factories had the capacity. North American Aviation proposed building a brand new design instead of simply recreating an existing British aircraft. The result was sleek, aerodynamic, and forward-thinking, but its real transformation came when the British insisted on installing the Rolls-Royce Merlin engine. That decision turned a promising idea into something extraordinary. By the time the Mustang reached full production, it had become the long-range escort fighter the Allies desperately needed. And soon, German pilots were seeing something strange in the sky. Formations of American bombers flying over targets that had once been considered unreachable, and beside them, these new fighters, climbing effortlessly, diving with precision, and returning fire with deadly accuracy. The Luftwaffe thought it was a fluke, a one-off, just another fighter that happened to fit the moment. But then, air combat reports started piling up. Squadrons attempted to pounce from above, the classic German tactic. They expected the Americans to struggle climbing to meet them, as most Allied fighters did. Instead, the Mustangs shot upward like they had been launched. Veteran pilots, men who had survived since the early stages of the war, swore that no piston-engine aircraft could climb that fast, not at that altitude, not with that range, not while still fighting. The doubts only grew when returning German pilots described something even more unsettling. The Mustang wasn't only quick in a climb. It held energy like no other aircraft. It stayed fast. It stayed responsive. And worst of all, it stayed there. No running out of fuel halfway home. No vanishing when the battle shifted deep into Germany. It stuck to the bombers like a shadow. Something didn't add up. Either the Americans had built a fighter that broke the known limits of piston aviation, or the rumors were distorted. That's why the captured Mustang became an obsession. As the aircraft sat under a gray German sky, surrounded by mechanics who had worked on Messerschmitts and Focke-Wulfs their entire careers, there was a feeling that they were examining the future. The airframe looked different, cleaner. Its wings blended smoothly into the fuselage. Its radiator scoop placed in such an odd position that many had initially laughed at the design until wind tunnel tests revealed just how efficient it really was. But the Germans were looking for something far more elusive than elegant curves. They wanted to know how this machine climbed the way pilots described. What hidden system made it soar? What secret did the Americans and perhaps the British discover? The first pilot chosen to fly the captured Mustang was no novice. He had flown almost every frontline German fighter, from the early Bf-109 variants to the powerful F-190. He approached the unfamiliar cockpit with a mix of irritation and curiosity. After all, he was a product of the Luftwaffe. He believed he already understood the limits of piston engine flight. As he strapped in and prepared for takeoff, Ground crews watched expectantly. Some hoped the Mustang would finally be exposed as overrated. Others had a sinking suspicion the legends were real. The engine roared to life with a sound that felt oddly different from the Daimler-Benz engines they knew. Deeper. Hungrier. The prop wash kicked up dust, and the Mustang began rolling forward. What happened next became the talk of the airfield. The moment the German pilot pulled back on the throttle and eased the Mustang into a climb, he felt the difference immediately. The aircraft didn't hesitate. It didn't lug or strain. It surged upward with a confidence that felt unnatural for its size and fuel load. The pilot glanced at his instruments, expecting to find some trick, but the numbers were real. He leveled off, only to push the aircraft again, testing its energy retention, its response, its balance. And for the first time in his career, he admitted to himself something he never expected. The Allies had created a fighter that outclassed Germany's best machines in ways that were not just tactical, but fundamental. When he landed, the airfield fell silent, waiting for his verdict. The pilot removed his goggles, paused, and uttered a sentence that confirmed every fear Germany had tried to dismiss. And that moment, that stunned reaction, would become the beginning of a story that explained why the Mustang changed the air war forever, and why its climb, its speed, and its endurance left German pilots wondering whether they had just flown against the future. When the German pilot stepped off the wing of the captured P-51, he looked like a man who had just witnessed something unsettling, something that contradicted what he believed about piston-engine fighters. The officers waiting near the hangar expected a report filled with flaws and weaknesses. Instead, the pilot spoke with an uncharacteristic quietness, choosing his words carefully. He explained that the Mustang didn't feel like an enemy aircraft. It felt refined, as if every inch of it had been shaped around one single purpose: to keep climbing, to keep fighting, and to never let go of the energy it carried into the sky. That alone caused an uneasy ripple through the gathered mechanics and engineers. German fighters were tough, agile, and deadly, but they all paid a price in at least one area: high-altitude power, range, or heat management. The P-51 seemed to have traded none of those away, and the more the Luftwaffe inspected it, the more troubling the details became. The first point of confusion was the radiator scoop, the famous Mustang belly intake. At first glance, it looked like a design mistake, a target waiting to be shot off. But inside the hangar, when German engineers studied the ducting and airflow system, they found something extraordinary. The intake didn't just cool the engine, it created thrust. A tiny but measurable amount. Warm air accelerating through the duct effectively offset the drag of the radiator. This wasn't a fluke, it was deliberate aerodynamic engineering. The Germans had theorized it before, known it as the Meredith effect, but they had never applied it with this level of efficiency. Then there was the wing, sleek, thin, shaped to minimize drag more effectively than the wings on their Bf 109 seconds or Fu 190 seconds. When they compared surface finish, panel alignment, and even the curve of the leading edge, they realized the Mustang had been built with a craftsmanship they couldn't duplicate at their current scale. Precision machining. Smooth, flush, riveting details that were easy to overlook but devastating in their impact on performance. Still, none of those discoveries fully explained what German pilots were actually witnessing in combat. The P-51 didn't just perform well on paper, it outclimbed fighters that were supposed to be superior in vertical maneuvers. It held energy in a dogfight where others bled speed. And it did all of this while escorting bombers hundreds of miles from home. To understand that, they had to look at the heart of the aircraft, the Merlin engine. By the time Germany captured a flyable Mustang, the Merlin-powered variants were already causing chaos in the skies. The two-stage supercharger gave the aircraft remarkable high-altitude performance. But what shocked the Luftwaffe was how smoothly the American-built Packard version of the Merlin delivered power. It didn't surge. It didn't choke. It climbed relentlessly, as if the engine enjoyed pushing against the thin air above 20,000 feet. During test flights, pilots pushed the Mustang into steep climbs to see when it would falter. It didn't. It simply kept going, rising at rates that didn't seem logical for its size. One pilot reported that it climbed like it had been relieved of its weight, a description that sounded poetic until engineers realized he meant it literally. The Mustang had been built lighter and more aerodynamically efficient than anything the Luftwaffe had in quantity. And there was something else German pilots couldn't ignore: the cockpit. It wasn't cramped like the 109. It wasn't brutally tight like the 190. The visibility was astonishing, the control layout logical, the handling balanced. The Mustang felt like a machine built for long missions and high-pressure fights, not a short-range interceptor that burned through fuel and strength. Even the control forces were surprising, smooth, stable, predictable. When pilots rolled the aircraft at high speed, they found no sudden wing drop, no violent behavior, nothing that punished a mistake. The Mustang forgave its pilot. And that was terrifying. Because, in a war where pilot experience had become the Luftwaffe's greatest weakness, an aircraft that allowed less experienced American pilots to fly like veterans was a nightmare scenario. But the deeper the Germans studied the Mustang, the more they realized its climb wasn't just about lift or superchargers or aerodynamics, it was about strategy. The Mustang had been built for a role the Luftwaffe had never imagined would exist. A fighter that could leave England, escort bombers all the way to Berlin, fight off interceptors, chase down stragglers, and still fly home. And when it came to pure combat experience, German pilots began sharing troubling observations from actual engagements. Many described diving onto bomber formations from above, expecting the Mustangs to be too sluggish to climb quickly enough to intercept. Instead, they watched them rocket upward in a way that shattered their confidence. The instinctive German boom and zoom, tactic dive, fire, pull up, and climb away suddenly became dangerous, because the Mustang could chase them back up. If a German fighter didn't execute its maneuver perfectly, it would find a P-51 snapping onto its tail. Reports from interviews with captured German pilots painted an even clearer picture. Some admitted that the worst moment wasn't seeing the Mustang alive, it was seeing it behind them. Once the aircraft locked into an energy climb, it held speed so efficiently that many German aces found themselves caught in situations where their own aircraft simply couldn't match the vertical performance. Several pilots estimated the Mustang must have been modified with lighter fuel loads or special engines. They refused to believe a mass-produced fighter could perform the way it did, until they flew it. That first test flight wasn't the last. More Luftwaffe pilots were assigned to evaluate the aircraft. Nearly all of them returned with the same stunned expression, and nearly all of them reported that the Mustang's climb was not exaggerated, it was real. And worse, it was consistent. No wonder American pilots spoke about it with so much confidence. They weren't bluffing. But perhaps the most interesting insight came from a German engineer who studied the engine cooling system for days. He concluded that the Mustang achieved what German designers had failed to perfect: a fighter that got more efficient as it went faster. The Germans had built fast fighters, powerful fighters, rugged fighters, but they had never built one that became smoother, cooler, and more stable the harder it was pushed. The P-51 had done exactly that. Yet the most unsettling realization came when the Luftwaffe compared climb performance data from real combat. The Mustang wasn't just climbing well, it was climbing when it shouldn't. Loaded with fuel, carrying ammunition, escorting bombers, fighting at high altitude, and still capable of shooting straight upward with enough strength remaining to chase or escape at will. No engineering manual had prepared them for an aircraft like this. And that left the Luftwaffe with a single, painful question. If this was what one captured Mustang could do, how many were already out there, waiting above the clouds? The more the Luftwaffe flew the captured Mustang, the more its reputation shifted from rumor to reality, from whispered exaggeration to something deeply unsettling. But the moment that truly cemented their fear came during a final, deliberate test, one meant to expose the Mustang's supposed limits. German engineers wanted to see if they could force it into a weakness, an altitude band, or a maneuver where its performance finally collapsed. If they could find just one vulnerability, perhaps they could pass the knowledge to frontline pilots. So on a cold morning, the aircraft was fueled, inspected, and handed over to a senior Luftwaffe flyer, a man known for pushing machines until they broke. He climbed into the Mustang's cockpit like someone approaching an adversary rather than a test aircraft. He planned to climb the P-51 until either it stalled, overheated, or surrendered to the thin air. What happened instead became one of the most unsettling climb tests of the war. The pilot throttled up, took off, and pointed the nose skyward. The airfield staff expected to see it slow down, wobble, or finally flatten out as altitudes climbed. But the Mustang didn't behave like a typical piston fighter. It ascended cleanly, steadily, and with an eerie smoothness that felt almost mechanical in its perfection. The pilot increased the angle, expecting a shudder or complaint from the engine. Nothing. He increased it again. Still nothing. The Mustang refused to behave like the aircraft he had spent years mastering. At around 25,000 feet, where many German fighters began losing their edge, the Mustang continued climbing as if it were shrugging off the thin air. The engine stayed cool. The controls remained responsive. He radioed down that he was beginning a steeper climbing turn, a maneuver that often robbed energy and exposed aerodynamic flaws. The Mustang executed it flawlessly. So he tried something more aggressive, rolling into a sustained vertical climb, the kind normally reserved for lighter interceptors with minimal fuel. Yet the P-51 held the maneuver. It didn't leap upward uncontrollably, but it didn't sag or wash out either. It was climbing when it should have been stalling, holding energy when it should have been bleeding it. That was the moment the pilot realized what Allied pilots had known for months. The P-51 didn't just climb fast, it climbed efficiently. Every drop of fuel, every ounce of thrust, every inch of wing was contributing to motion rather than fighting against drag. And that made it more than just a fast aircraft. It made it a relentless one. When he finally brought the Mustang down, frost forming on his flight suit from the thin, frigid air he had pierced through, the ground crews gathered around him like witnesses awaiting a verdict. But the pilot didn't bark orders or file a cold technical report. Instead, he stepped off the wing slowly, as if he had just returned from a place he hadn't expected to see. He said something that spread through Luftwaffe testing circles like smoke. "This aircraft does not fly like a piston fighter. It flies like something beyond our reach." The engineers didn't take that literally, of course, but they understood perfectly what he meant. The Mustang represented a different philosophy, a different approach to design, engineering, and strategy. It wasn't a miracle, it wasn't lucky. It was the product of countless ideas working together. Fuel efficiency, aerodynamic cleanliness, smart cooling systems, a superb engine, and the sheer industrial capacity to build them in enormous numbers. In that single moment, Germany understood that they weren't fighting a single aircraft. They were fighting an idea, one that combined British engineering, American manufacturing, and a wartime urgency that pushed boundaries they had once believed immovable. But the true measure of the Mustang wasn't found in captured German reports. It was found in the skies where it earned its reputation. American bomber crews described the moment they saw the first Mustangs over Germany like a weight being lifted from their chests. They watched these sleek fighters dart between bomber groups, climb faster than interceptors diving from above, and then return to formation without losing momentum. For the first time, airmen felt they could make it home. German pilots, on the other hand, began dreading the silhouette that emerged from the sun or rose from below their dives. Many would later confess, some reluctantly, some openly, that the P-51 was the one Allied aircraft that truly shifted the balance of the air war. Not just because it could fight, not just because it could chase, but because it could be there, everywhere, for the entire mission. The climb rate that had stunned that first German test pilot became its most feared trait. In an environment where altitude was everything, where the pilot who held the sky held the advantage, the Mustang seized control of the upper reaches and never let go. Its ability to accelerate upward meant it could break up interception attempts before they formed, protect bombers from multiple angles, and punish any German fighter that hesitated for even a second. The Luftwaffe had powerful machines. The Bf 109 was lethal in a tight climb. The Fort 190 was ferocious at low altitude. But neither could do everything at once. Neither could escort. Neither could chase retreating fighters all the way to the horizon. Neither could climb at full combat weight, at high altitude, with the confidence of a machine that knew it still had more power in reserve. That was the Mustang's true advantage. It always had one more climb left. In the final months of the war, Luftwaffe pilots knew the sky had changed. Their strategic opportunities were shrinking. Their best aces were gone. Fuel was running low. And above all, the enemy now possessed a fighter that erased the one edge Germany had relied on for years: altitude dominance. The Mustang didn't just break that dominance, it shattered it. And when the war ended, years later, many German pilots who survived would openly acknowledge the truth they once refused to believe. The P-51 Mustang was not overrated. It was not exaggerated. It was the machine that changed the air war over Europe. not because it was the fastest or the most powerful, but because it was balanced in a way no other frontline fighter had been. Its climb was real, its endurance was real, its impact was undeniable,